First of all, congratulations to all of you. Not that you are here tonight specifically to hear me talk. There's probably, other good use of your time, but congratulations that you are considering going full entrepreneurial, starting your own thing. Now, obviously, after we got the fantastic news about the 90% vaccination effectiveness out of BioNTech, I guess we all feel how, well, it became very tangible to all of us, how impactful entrepreneurship actually can be, especially if it is connected to actual hard science. But even without that, which I think is fantastic, I think it's a fantastic story for this country, for hopefully a trigger for us thinking differently and treating with more respect people who come from other countries to do stuff like that here. But even without all of those aspects, it is a great choice because it's the only way you can design your own career in a way that you are fully in control of. Depending on where you are in career, you will have learned that most people are idiots already, or you are about to find that out. And the only way you can make sure that you don't have to deal too much with idiots is by actually starting your own company. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the luxury of defining the own context with whom you want to work is one of life's big luxuries, and definitely has a massive impact when it comes to not only your professional success, but also your quality of life. So in that context, I'm very happy to contribute a tiny bit here by shedding a bit of light on the venture capital and startup environment, especially among bright minds like yours, because I think we do need people entering this arena who not only want to build the next food delivery service, but actually want to do something meaningful and profound. And in order to make this the next 25 minutes or so most valuable for you, I decided to approach it a bit differently because there's lots of stuff that you can learn and read in the internet, like how awesome is venture capital, how awesome is entrepreneurship. But I want to phrase it a bit differently, and I want to give you can see it here, the ugly truth about venture capital. Because on YouTube you find dozens, if not hundreds, of talks by people like me about how awesome they are, and if you only are a little bit like us, then success will come and so on. But I don't think that's really relevant. I think I want to take you a little behind the scenes and explain a little bit what it is that we do, and also what is wrong with our industries, but also always, of course, with a clear attitude, how can you use that for yourself, right? So as there's not going to be a commercial for anything, but hopefully one level deeper, we'll try to understand how my industry works and what problems it has and how you can use it as an entrepreneur. Because venture capital probably is at the core of everything that is startup related. For a lot of important companies, this was the main funding source. And in the past couple of years, at least here in Germany, but actually, if we look around the world, this topic of entrepreneurship, startup, venture capital, business angels has been pretty dominant. And maybe some of you know this group of people here. Those are, in Germany, it's called die Höhle der Löwen. So for the German television consumers among you, you're probably aware of this. In the United States, it's called Shark Tank. I think in the UK or somewhere, it's called the Lion's Den. There even is a list on Wikipedia with this show format has been exported all over the world. There's a version in Afghanistan. There's a version basically in every other country. So this idea of starting your own company has been proliferated into basically the whole world. So I think it's fair to say that peak startup hype has been reached. Everyone thinks their nephew is building the next Facebook, and this amazing app idea will basically be the one that is finally changing the world. And those TV formats are obviously an aspect of it, but also if you talk to big corporations who are all, of course, struggling or at least dealing with digitization. What does it mean for us? How do we need to behave? All that kind of stuff. Startup seems to always be part of the answer. So here in Berlin, we have all of those corporate think tanks, all those fancy offices where people don't need to wear a suit like in the headquarters, but here they can wear shorts and they can drink Club Mate instead of coffee, and they just need to be very creative and agile, and suddenly they're supposed to, solve all the issues that that the industry has. And the big question is, of course, like, is that actually true, right? Is it really that helpful? Is startup really the answer to everything? Because you, on one side, you would say, yeah, startups are pretty awesome, because all of those companies here, Airbnb, SpaceX, UiPath, Epic Games, Stripe, Palantir, Robinhood, Coinbase, WeWork, okay, maybe not the best of examples, but for a while, it looked like this was basically the hottest startup around. But all of those companies are basically funded because of people like me. Those companies are all probably similar to what you are working on. So those are all ideas that are unlike a bakery that you can just start and you get a bank loan, and every day you sell a bit more bread and you kind of grow by yourself. Those companies are very different. Those companies are technology driven to more or less of a degree. They're research driven, again, some more, some less. But in general, all of those companies have in common that in the beginning, you dig a big hole in terms of cash. You spend money, because you have some kind of period where you are in the development phase. And once you enter the market, of course, hopefully you start selling. And the idea here is always that everything is super scalable, right? So if it is successful, we make a huge profit. Like Airbnb, probably, going public, one of the most successful travel companies of all kinds. SpaceX, basically a private company that is going to put people in space again, pretty amazing. UiPath is a B2B software company here. Epic Games, the makers of Fortnite. So very different, but at the same time, very high possible return. Yes, there's risk in the beginning, but there is very high return. And my industry, so the venture capital world, are basically the people who are funding those businesses, because those businesses, when they start, they basically have no chance to get money from a bank. That's very important to know. So you might think, and that's why this is called the ugly truth about venture capital. So you might think that people like me, if you were able to invest in all of those companies very, very early on and look at them, how well they are performing now, you're probably going to be rich. As an industry, you're probably going to do amazing things, because there are people who invested 50,000 euros in the first round of Uber, and they made over 100 million personal return. That exists. So you might think, okay, great. So that probably means venture capital is awesome, startups is awesome, everybody makes a ton of money, everything is great. But that, unfortunately, is not true, because the first fundamental, unfortunate truth, ugly truth about my industry, and this is probably weird because I'm supposed to tell you about how awesome everything is. But the first thing that is really important to understand is that venture capital, my industry, does not work. And what does that mean? That means that if you were to invest your money basically in an index fund, so into every venture capital firm that is out there, you would not make money. Sometimes you lose a little bit of money, sometimes you make money, but it has nothing to do with the Uber-like returns of putting in 50,000 and getting 100 million, nothing like that. And why is that? So we are getting a bit of pseudoscience here, probably, not that much for you guys, but basically, if we look at how success looks like in the venture capital world, in the startup world, it basically is like this. You have a small, you can see my hands here, right? So yeah, so basically this part here is just a very small amount of companies that are very successful, but they are very successful. And then if you look at this part of the histogram, from here onwards, basically everybody else, and we're talking about 1995, maybe even 99% of startups, depending on who we count and what companies we include, are not successful. And this line here of this, it should basically go around the room a couple of times, because the likelihood of success is very low. But if you are successful, and we're talking about the space of technology, innovation-driven companies, if you are successful, you can be very successful. But if you're not, there is like a long, realm where people don't make a lot of money. So that probably explains that on average, venture capital doesn't really work. And that means, of course, that our job here as a venture capital investor is always to find the companies that are basically in this part. You can't see my fingers now, right? But in this part, those are obviously the companies, those investments I want to do. And all of the ones on this part of the curve are not that interesting, right? Because here I'm just losing money, and here I have a chance to make a lot of money as an investor. So what does that mean for my daily life? I want to give you like a short glimpse about how 1 year in my company and at Project A Ventures looks like. And it's a funnel, right? So my job basically is the professional version of what you see on a TV when you look at Die Höhle der Löwen, Lion's Den, Shark Tank, whatever they're called. So we are looking at, I would say, the numbers are a bit outdated. I would say probably roughly we look at 10,000 startups every year. Out of those, you can basically almost double those numbers for current values. So let's say for simplicity's sake, we look at 1,000 and we speak to 1,000 companies every day. So we have a team that conducts 1,000 startup interviews every day. Every year. I as a partner, I speak to roughly 300 companies every year. And out of those 300, we then submit, maybe 30, 40 to the actual due diligence process. And at the end of the day, we make 8, 9, 10 investments. So that is obviously very steep, right? In an effort to make sure we don't invest, or that we figure out who are the actual winners. It's hard to say in the beginning because those are early stage companies, right? We invest 1 to 7 million euros. So it's still at the very early stage of everything. It's not like you can just look at a few numbers and yes, those are the successful ones, those are the bad ones. Everybody is basically still on the first kilometer of the marathon. It's really hard to say who's going to be the winner in the end. So we are doing all of this, speaking to 10,000 to at the end invest in 10. So basically out of 1,000 that we connect with, we only invest in 1. We only do that because we of course want to find out what are the companies that are really valuable. So that all sounds pretty depressing, I guess, right? Because until now, all that we learned is that venture capital itself doesn't work, and it seems like it's very hard to get actually attention by somebody like me. But the good news is we actually can turn this around, and this segment here, those 10 companies. Those companies suddenly have options. And that's the beauty about this, because what that also means is that if you are one of those companies here in this segment, and I think, for example, by engaging in programs like this one, by trying often, by working hard, by, of course, having the right business idea, by finding the right balance between sticking and working hard with one idea and then potentially shifting or pivoting, by doing all the things that you need to do right in execution, you, of course, are increasing your chance a lot to get into the segment. And the good thing is the market is really open for you if you are in that segment, because those 10 guys here that make it that far, they have options. And I'm actually in 2 businesses. I'm in the business of making this whole funnel work. But then the second half of my job is that those people here, those startups here, I want to make sure they take my money. So I'm begging those people basically to take money from you, because suddenly the power dynamic really shifts, because people who are successful in the startup world or who have something very interesting that might be successful later on, they will always have options. I can speak to investor A, I can speak to investor B. So that's the good news. Built on this ugly truth that venture capital is really hard. That means only money can be made with a very small amount of companies. And that basically means venture capital, my industry, has to be a product for you guys. And this is where I don't agree with the TV shows, because the TV shows are always like, there's 5 people, sitting in beautiful chairs, and basically the companies come in on their knees asking them for, can I have some money, please? And it's the other way around. We are actually the ones who kind of like hunt for companies, approach them, say, please, can you take my money? And that's a good thing, because that brings innovation into my industry, and people are thinking about how can I actually develop my venture capital product for entrepreneurs. And maybe just like a quick excursion, because this is not an advertising for what I do specifically, but hopefully it's more helpful than that. But when we started out in the venture capital world, we thought, what is a good way to make ourselves competitive in that market? Because if there are only like a few really interesting companies around and we are on the hunt for those out of a big sea of very different companies, we look, of course, for ways to identify them, but also we look for ways how we can position ourselves to those companies as a good partner. So what did we do? Maybe just as a quick summary, we started the Project A as a venture capital firm. We're headquartered in Berlin. This is our little tower here in Berlin. We focus on early stage digital business models. So we really like healthcare. We have a bunch of healthcare investments, but they always have some kind of digital angle to it. Now, the interesting thing is that we have 85 people on payroll. Actually, it's over 100 by now. And those people work with companies that we invest in if they want it. So those are all operational experts, marketing, technology, sales, recruiting. So everything that could be useful for you as an entrepreneur if you start a company, if you just acquired some investment, and getting the money in the bank account is only step one. And then, of course, the real work starts. And we're there also to help you with the real work if you want it. That's very important. It's not something that we force you to do. It's something that we're offering to you as a pure optionality. And we do this, of course, it costs us a lot of money, to employ 85, 100 people. But we do that because we think we need to offer something to entrepreneurs like you so that they will ultimately decide, hey, I want to work with Project A because they can give me something else. And I think that's very important. So that gives you, I think, a first overview, setting the scene a little bit about the venture capital world. So maybe so far, if you ask yourself, so what did I learn today? How am I more likely to be successful today? Until now, you heard a lot of anecdotes and probably know how the venture capital world works a little bit. And maybe you understand that not everything is as shiny as, blog posts, YouTube videos, TV shows, and everything wants to make you believe. But as a next step, I want to walk you through a couple of more ugly truths about the industry, but also specifically how you can use them to your advantage. Now, I think that's going to be interesting. First of all, one thing that you need to keep in mind when dealing with venture capitalists like myself, we are slaves to our economics. Now, our economics are fund economics. So Raul mentioned earlier, we have $500 million that we need to invest. It's in different funds. The latest fund is roughly 200 million. Those 200 million we allocate to 20 to 25 startups. And if I know that, as per the previous chart, that at least 1 out of 10, at the most 1 or 2 out of 10 are actually successful, that means that every single investment needs to have the potential to be a really, really big success. Yeah? So that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand when dealing with venture capitalists. I do not care about downside protection. If somebody comes to me and tells me, hey, even if it doesn't work out, you still double your money, I don't care about that. For every investment, I need to understand, is there a chance I do 10 times my money or 20 times my money if I invest now and wait a couple of years? The downside protection, if it's going bad, it's not going to be that bad, that doesn't really matter to me. In a venture capital firm, it's only important to look at the very successful cases. We call that swinging for the fences. So in American baseball, if obviously somebody throws the ball, the other person is trying to hit it with a bat. And of course, you want to hit it as far and wide as you want, because then it's a home run. Then basically you score right away. The alternative is to kind of play it safe. So if you don't give it your all, if you don't hit with full power, if you just hit it a little, it's more likely you'll hit something. But if you hit something, it's not going to be a huge success. We are going for swinging for the fences, which means high error ratio. It's actually totally fine for us to have a high error ratio. We're not optimizing for low error ratio. We're optimizing for, yes, of course, likelihood of success, but also specifically about magnitude of success. That's very important to understand. A lot of people don't really get that. And it has to do not because we like one investment more or one investment less. It has to do with we have funds, 200 millions, and our playing field is the one that I showed you before. Very few companies very successful, everybody else not so successful. Second aspect, VCs, if you see the sheer amount of stuff that we have to do, we have a very simple thought process. And that's the one I think that's important for you to understand, because this is like the standard scheme, the first initial pass that we do at a potential company. First, the market is large and attractive. High revenue growth rates can be maintained and further improved. Of course, a lot of assumptions go into that, but just bear with me. The team is capable of building the product, scaling it, and hiring the right people. Super important. Hiring the right people is one of the core aspects. We want to know if people are capable of getting even better people on board. An effective marketing and or sales operations in place. And then ultimately, significant return on investment for the investor can be returned. You'll see all of those long schemes of like, what are investors thinking? How are they analyzing? At the end of the day, if I really want to reduce it to 5 simple points, those are the points. So you can obviously slice and dice it from very different perspectives, and you can ask clever questions to get to those answers. But at the end of the day, this is just the thought process that we go through. Number 3, VCs are paranoid about adverse selection. Right? I mean, that is something that is very scary for us. The worst thing that could happen to us is that we have a bias in our selection that is basically negative. What does it mean? It means we are looking for a lot of signals when we have those 10,000 companies every year that we engage with. We are looking for signals very quickly. Could this be an adverse selection case? So a couple of points. A cold outreach is virtually useless. So what do I mean by that? I mean by that out of the 10,000 companies, we tend to interact more with the ones who are somehow able to get an introduction, who spend a bit of time of getting an introduction so that they don't have to send us a cold email, but there is some kind of connection on which they can send us an email. The reasoning behind that is, if you want to build a 500 million plus business, it's going to be tough. But a good proxy is that if you have no idea how to ever get close to us, it's not such a good of a sign. That is our initial thinking. Now I have to say, I'm deviating on purpose from that a little, because it is something. I think our industry has a problem with giving access to underrepresented groups. And I think this is a heuristic that we use that is probably, it has some kind of rational basis why we do that, but it's not necessarily fair. So I'm on the process of striking that, because I'm working more and more to also look at cold outreach, because it gives people without pre-existing networks also a chance to get access to our money. But in general, I would always recommend, if you have the chance, if you can spend a few days, go on LinkedIn, find people who know us, and just try to hack a bit of an introduction together. Typically, you will find a way. And even if it takes a few days, it's probably worth the efforts. Be careful with startup events, conferences, pitches. We know all the companies who are at every event, who are at every conference, at every startup pitch. And oftentimes we wonder, okay, when do those teams actually really build their business? So you got to be a bit careful around that. The same goes, there's a right time and place for personal PR. It's been a big thing now for the past couple of months and years that founders also build a bit of a personal brand. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but the same as with the events, you really need to make sure that you want to balance it right and not kind of come across in a way that this is all that I'm doing, and I'm not really working with the business. And the last part I think is similar. Who are my investors? Who are accelerators? Who are programs with which I work? If you after this engage with more investors and so on, try to get a bit of feedback also for this, because if we, for example, see somebody popping up with an investor with whom we didn't have good experiences over and over again, because maybe they have predatory behavior towards founders or something like that, it's a bit of a signal for adverse selection, because the founders were a bit too naive in engaging with them. Number 4. VCs are obsessed about social signals and FOMO. And FOMO is one of the beautiful VC terms, and it means the fear of missing out. So yes, number 3 was we really don't like adverse selection, but at the same time, we're also always paranoid. Did we just miss the next big thing? Was this the next BioNTech and we just missed this because we didn't understand it? How can you use this to your advantage? First, social signals. So we are talking to a lot of other venture capital firms and exchanging know-how with them about companies. So don't bluff too much. Don't say investor X already gave us a term sheet. So basically already told us he would invest because you want us to give a higher valuation or something, because we will speak to investor X. And if then your bluff gets called, then obviously it's a very bad signal, because then we know A, you actually didn't have an offer on the table, and B, you thought that we wouldn't find out. So not a really good signal. We are super obsessed about customer feedback in due diligence. So when we are looking into your company, customer feedback is just a great social signal for us to have about you. And then last, don't start too high into negotiations. Because negotiations, at the end of the day, we will have to talk about, okay, I'm going to invest 5 million euros for 20% of your company. So, and the underlying number for that is, of course, the valuation. So the price that we need to agree on for your startup. There's no scientific method to really get to that price. It's really just a negotiation. But I would always recommend in those negotiations, start low, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. But for us, for example, if somebody starts low, and there is competitive dynamic, if there are more investors, the price will increase very quickly automatically. It's not a problem. And then suddenly somebody started low, but we see, oh, okay, a lot of people seem to be interested. The price is going up, so this must be a good thing. If the opposite is happening and you tell me the valuation is 50 million, and then a week later you tell me, well, I know he wasn't interested because the valuation was too high. And the valuation is now 40. I'm like, okay, nobody wants to do this deal. There's no momentum here. And then basically very quickly it can go from 40 to 40, from 50 to 40 to 30 to 20 to basically nothing. And it's really complicated. I just want to say, yeah. I'll answer the question probably a bit later. Number 5, another ugly truth about us: we invest, and you might look to us as people who have a lot of insights about businesses and can help you be successful. But basically, at the end of the day, we cannot influence a company after we invested. So we are buying minority stakes for millions of euros, and we give the money to you, and it's basically your job to build a successful company with that. We do know that business plans are a lie. So, you're building great business plans, great Excel exercises, and we know only one thing. The only thing that we actually know is that the chance of what you're predicting here coming true is absolutely 0. Everything else is possible, but that this is happening is 0. It's never going to happen, never, ever. Everything is going to go different as planned, and there's just the only thing that we'll know, the 2 things. A, how good are your Excel skills? Are you able to build like a well-functioning table format? And B, we can of course use it to understand the dynamics and the mechanics of the business. So it's not useless, but we are investing in you because we think, especially, not only are you predicting a nice future, we don't care about that. We're investing in you because we know the future is not going to come in this way, but you are the team that will be able to steer the company even if the future is totally different than what you had planned. And for that, we are looking for people who are intellectually humble. What do we mean by that? We mean by that people, the best predictor, the best proxy for being able to steer a company in an unprecedented future is, are you open to new input? It doesn't mean that it's not the same as, can everybody tell you what to do? It just means that even very successful entrepreneurs, actually the most successful that I worked with and have met, are super interested in getting other people's input. Hey, here's we have a junior employee. What do you think? What should we do? There's competitors. What do you think we do? There's outside stakeholders. Ask them for input. Asking the intern, what would he do different? And not doing everything that way, but trying to understand. So we are, of course, for example, always very interested. How do the entrepreneurs, when they still came to our office pre-corona, how do they interact not only with me, because I will ask them, are you open for input from other people? And of course they will say, yes, I'm very open for other input and I want to do my best. But it's a very different thing how they interact with me than with other people who they don't think they need to be nice to. So I'm, for example, always very interested, how do they treat people that sit at reception? Because it's just a good proxy. If you treat other people that you don't think you have to be nice to, if you still are just a nice, generally interested, open person, that's a very good predictor for us for actually successful entrepreneurs. The last ugly truth: we are running big internal organizations. So massive workloads, as you've seen, short attention span. So please, and that's never going to change. So please, if you want to engage with us, if you want to have money from us, and by us, I mean the whole industry, everybody in venture capital, make our life easier. What's helpful, good, concise slide decks in English, obviously, so that, yes, now we've all learned you don't want to put too much text on your slides, and you want to have great, cool slides that just work for an inspiring presentation. That's all fine, but your slide deck in the organization, in the venture capital firm, it will just be sent around among our staff, and some of them won't have the presentation. So it just needs to be good enough. It's supposed to be concise, but it needs to be exhaustive. So people need to understand what this is about by just looking at the slides without having the presentation. I would always recommend, especially for companies that have, technologically more complex things or very innovative things, to create an FAQ document, a frequently asked questions document, which has two benefits. One is it just helps to answer a lot of questions, and B, it sends the social signal there are a lot of frequently asked questions. So a lot of people are interacting with the company. So it seems like you're speaking to a lot of investors, and those other investors ask good questions. So probably I have to work hard to make sure that I get a shot of investing in this company. And don't underestimate the team beyond the partners. So I'm a partner, but we have a team of, I would say, 10 or so investment managers. And at least within our organization, they have a lot of power. So it's definitely not a waste of time to speak to them. Even if they are a bit more junior in the hierarchy, they are the ones to make the trains run on time. And they are the ones who make those processes work. And if they want to kill an investment, they can kill it. And if they want to do an investment, they can do a big part of the work to actually get it done on our end. Those were the ugly truths, 6, 7 if you count the really big ones in the beginning. And one last thing, one of my colleagues is called Enrico, and he has created this little checklist that I can really recommend everyone when dealing with investors. So I gave you some other tips already about hopefully how to game the system. But before you interact with venture capitalists, those are the questions. Do I really need external funding? Potentially, you can just fund the company out of existing businesses, and you don't need to interact with us at all. That's a good situation to be in because it gives you flexibility. How much money do I really need? What's the best next step for me to take? 18 months or so? What is the best next achievement that I want to unlock with this money? How much ownership am I going to give away? So what part of my company am I willing to give away for that? How much am I worth? This is not a self-worth psychological question. This is just a mathematical question, basically the result of the two questions above. How much should my company be valued at the moment to make all of this work? Which investors do I need to approach? So you really need to understand what phase am I in, who are the right investors, what kind of investors would I like, and how can investors be of help? What am I asking from investors? So this is a good checklist to ask yourself, to deal with, to understand, and as an exercise with your co-founders, with your advisors, to go through that. But also in the interaction with us, with investors, we will probably ask you those things. And the more thoughtful your answers are, the better, of course. And with that, I'll close here. This was hopefully somewhat interesting, hopefully somewhat relevant. I mean, we started out explaining why my industry actually does not work, or what flaws it has, because I think your impression might be very different if you're just following television and what you read on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever. But hopefully we were able to turn this around a little into a way of explaining how you can make this work for you. That at least was the goal. Hopefully it's helpful for you, and happy to answer some more questions if there are any. But so far, hopefully it is somehow helpful for you on the journey that you're on, which I can only congratulate you for, because even if it's not the first or the second startup, persistence definitely pays off, and eventually I'm pretty sure whatever you're building will be very successful.